Okay, good evening, everyone. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Oh, thank you for your patience. We quite the turnout. I hope everybody made it in okay, and it was smooth for everybody to register this evening. I want to thank you for coming all the way here to Stonehill. We made sure that we wanted to make sure that we had a big enough space to seat everybody that would want to come out on this issue this evening. And with that being said, welcome to the first of two special town meetings this fall. We have this one tonight, and then we have another special town meeting, of course, on November the 12th. And my name's Kate Welch. I'm your town moderator. Up here on the stage with me is Jay Tallerman. He is our town council. Danielle Sicard, she's the town clerk. And then further off at the other table is Dr. Alicia Cabral and Connor Reed, our town administrator. Before we begin, I'd like to start the evening by having a moment of silence for Easton Town Police Officer Pat Taylor, who was laid to rest today. Thank you. If everyone could please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Before we begin, I want to first recognize this evening we have 4 deputy town moderators that I have asked to help us out this evening, one at each microphone that you can see kind of in the middle of the room. So at the first microphone, we have Jessica Dubin. At the second microphone, we have Michael Spillane. He's making his way up to the microphone now. At the third microphone, we have Walter Marioni. He's got his hand raised. Did. There it is. And at the fourth microphone, we have Tom Persley, who's also standing up. Thank you. So while you've been sitting here this evening, again, I want to thank everybody for being here early. While you've been sitting here this evening, I'm sure that you've noticed the rules that we're scrolling on the big screens that we have here in front of you. I just want to go over the rules before we actually begin the meeting, okay? There's one article on tonight's warrant. After the meeting is called to order, a presentation will be made. No speakers will be recognized during the presentation. Second rule, all voters must remain seated. Please do not stand against the back or the side walls or linger in the aisles, as it can create a safety hazard, and we want everyone to be safe tonight. There's no designated section this evening for non-voters. Non-voters can sit anywhere because voters all got a hand stamp. After the presentation is complete, if you're a registered voter and you have a question, you may proceed to one of the 4 microphones set up throughout the room, as I just pointed out. There will be a deputy town moderator at each microphone, as I just pointed out. And the deputy will check your hand stamp to make sure that you're a registered voter before you speak. Once at their microphone, please state your name and your address first. Please remember that the meeting is being recorded by ECAT. It's very important to speak directly into the microphone and to be clear and concise so voters in the room and residents at home can hear you. Each voter may only speak once, just one time. The moderator will not allow a voter to speak more than once. Gather your thoughts and make sure you cover everything you want to say once you're recognized. Discussion will only be allowed relative to this one article. Please stay within the scope of the article, and please be courteous. Always, as always, no cross-examination. Cross-examination won't be allowed. If you have an issue that does not require you to go to the microphone, such as a point of order, you must stand first and be recognized as a registered voter. In this situation, because the room is so big, normally when we are at OA, if somebody has a point of order or something that doesn't call them to go to the microphone, we allow you just to stand in your seat. In this situation, if you have such a non-motion, a point of order, for example, I'm going to ask that you do go to the microphone and be recognized, just because of the size of the room. Every voter should have one ballot. The single warrant article will be voted on tonight by ballot. When we move to vote, the town clerk will provide instructions on how to cast your ballot. Row by row, we will proceed to the ballot boxes to ensure an orderly voting process. You can see the ballot boxes. I believe there are 6 up here in the front and 2 in the back. And she'll tell you when it's time to vote how to proceed. You must be present to vote. There's been a lot of question about that this evening, and you must be present to vote. Do not give your ballot to your neighbor and ask him or her to put it in the ballot box. There'll be an election official or many election officials standing at the ballot boxes during the voting to ensure that each voter casts one and only one ballot tonight. And remember, ladies and gentlemen, this is a 2-step process for the EES project. As a reminder to everybody, this town meeting is one of 2 opportunities for you to exercise your right to vote on the early elementary school project. The second opportunity is the November 5th election, the debt exclusion override election, which is next Tuesday at the Oliver Ames High School from 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. Okay, clearly we have a quorum present, so at this point, I'm going to call the meeting to order. Select Person Fulgenet.
I move that the town vote to appropriate the amount of $94,839,543 for the purpose of paying costs of the early elementary school project, a new early elementary school serving the pre-kindergarten through 2nd grade students of Easton, to be constructed on the existing Parkview School site located at 50 Spooner Street, Easton, Massachusetts. The project shall include the demolition of the existing Parkview School and construction of a new building for all pre-K2 students in Easton, including those currently enrolled at the Center School in Moreau Hall, and shall include, but not be limited to, reconfiguration of the Parkview School site for related uses such as pedestrian pathways, parking, bus, and other vehicle traffic routes, and all other costs incidental and related thereto the project, which school facility shall have an anticipated useful life as an educational facility for the instruction of school children of at least 50 years, and for which the town may be eligible for a school construction grant from the Massachusetts School Building Authority, MSBA, said amount to be expended under the direction of the School Planning Committee. To meet this appropriation, the treasurer, with the approval of the Select Board, is authorized to borrow said amount under Mass General Law, Chapter 44, or pursuant to any other enabling authority. The town acknowledges that the MSBA's grant program is a non-entitlement discretionary program based on need as determined by the MSBA, and any project costs the town incurs in excess of any grant approved by and received by from the MSBA shall be the sole responsibility of the town, provided further that any grant that the town may receive from the MSBA for the project shall not exceed the lesser of 1/55 and 93/100% of eligible approved project costs as determined by the MSBA, or 2, the total maximum grant amount determined by the MSBA, provided that any appropriation hereunder shall be subject to and contingent upon an affirmative vote of the town to exempt the amounts required for the payment of interest and principal on said borrowing from the limitations on taxes imposed by Mass General Law 59, Section 21C, Proposition 2.5, and that the amount of borrowing authorized pursuant to this vote shall be reduced by any grant amount set forth in the project funding agreement that may be executed between the town and the MSBA, and any premium received by the town upon the sale of any bonds or notes approved by this vote, less any such premium applied to the payment of the costs of issuance of such bonds or notes may be applied to the payment of costs approved by this vote in accordance with Chapter 44, Section 20 of the general laws, thereby reducing the amount authorized to be borrowed to pay such cost by a like amount.
Second.
By way of explanation, this article will authorize the necessary borrowing authority for the town to design and construct the Easton Early Elementary School. The Early Elementary School will be a new district-wide pre-K through grade 2 school, which will provide a state-of-the-art, innovative, and nurturing learning environment to Easton Public School students for decades to come, and will serve as a premier community resource and gathering space. The appropriation and borrowing authorization in this article is contingent upon a successful debt exclusion election scheduled for Tuesday, November 5th, 2019, from 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. at the town-wide polling location, Oliver Ames High School. In order for the early elementary school project to advance, both this article and the debt exclusion ballot question on November 5th must pass. The Select Board recommends.
Finance Committee recommends.
School Committee. School Planning Committee. Municipal Building Committee. Budget Subcommittee.
Recommends.
Economic Development Council.
Recommends.
So now we're going to have two presentations, the first by Dr. Alicia Cabral.
Good evening. Thank you, everyone, for being here. We appreciate your attendance at this very important meeting. We do have some information to share with you. We'll be as brief as we can be, but there is a lot of information, and because it is such an important consideration for you, and it does involve a great deal of money, we want to make sure you have all of the information you need and all of the answers you require before making a decision that is best for you and your family. This evening, we have our owner's project manager, PMA consultants, as well as the designers and architects, Perkins Eastman, who will help us answer any questions if necessary. I'm going to begin the project by talking about the background, the site and configuration, and the building design, and then Connor Reed, Town Administrator, will finish with the finances, which are obviously very important. The Easton Elementary School project is really being seen as the culmination of a 25-year effort to bring all of the schools in town up to date and able to offer a 21st safe education to our students in the 21st century. We have successfully had projects thanks to your support for education and the buildings in this town, for Oliver Ames and Easton Middle School, as well as a new building for Richardson Olmsted, and we are very thankful for that support. This is the final part of that, which will address all three elementary schools at the same time, and I'd like to explain how we got there. You're going to hear MSBA referred to quite a lot by both myself and Connor Reed. The MSBA is the Massachusetts School Building Authority. We're fortunate because they are a government agency who has the capacity to distribute millions and millions of dollars just for school projects from state funds. Since 2004, they have distributed over $24 billion they have participated in projects that total over $24 billion. These projects have been meticulously audited, and all of them have been very successful projects, as well as done in a very fiscally responsible manner. They have been with us every step of the way and given us a lot of advice and resources in the last 2 years while we've been working with them. And we're very thankful that it is a very scripted and strict process. We are extremely proud to say that we have passed and been accepted for every stage so far in this process. They work by deciding which municipalities, or in some cases regional schools, will receive money for funding within the Commonwealth. They have over 150 requests a year, and they typically do between 15 and 20 projects. So we were extremely fortunate to be chosen. The other acronym you're going to hear us say is DESE, or hear me anyway, and that's the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. They've also been very involved, and we also received their approval for this project. We have 3 significant challenges right now. One is that the schools don't have enough space. As one example, Center School has 36,500 square feet currently. Based on MSBA minimum guidelines, that school should have 57,500. Education is just not the same as it was when these schools were built upwards of 65 years ago. They also don't have the right kinds of spaces. Again, because of the change in education, we are now using storage closets as office space, places to provide instruction to our students. We have unfortunately been cited by the state. We are under current corrective action because of some of our spaces in our facilities not being appropriate for the learning that's happening there. Moreau Hall was not built as a school, as many of you know. It does not have walls, and it is very difficult to maintain engagement of students in that environment. Fortunately, we are blessed with the most amazing educators that I have had the pleasure of working with in 30 years of education. And what we're looking to do is raise the level of the facilities to the level of the education they are currently receiving. The third is that the infrastructure is failing. Unfortunately, these schools were built in an era where materials that we now know to be hazardous were used quite frequently. And so we have asbestos remediation that happens very often. We don't have appropriate fire suppression systems. We are out of code compliance. Because we are grandfathered right now, we make those repairs incrementally. However, now that they are 65 years old, they are getting to a point where systems are failing. One important thing to understand is that when we do a large-scale repair of any building, if the cost of that project is 1/3 the value of the building, all of the current codes kick into place. And so we would have to make all of the buildings ADA compliant, seismic compliant. They would need fire suppression systems, et cetera. You can imagine how much that would cost. Connor will get into the details with you. However, I have noticed as superintendent, in trying to avoid those costs, I realize what we're doing is we're avoiding making our schools compliant. We're avoiding making them accessible to those who have physical disabilities or mobility issues. We're avoiding making them as safe as we can. In order to give you an idea...
The town of Easton is proposing a new
of
early
the schools,
elementary
we have this
school
short video.
using funds obtained locally in addition to a grant by the Massachusetts School Building Authority. The 3 primary school buildings in Easton, Center, Moreau, and Parkview, present significant challenges to a modern 21st century education. These challenges include overcrowding, traffic concerns, failing infrastructure, and an outdated facility that falls far short of meeting the educational programming needs of our youngest learners. Our primary school principals are your guides for a video tour of their buildings. Here is a sneak peek at what you can expect to see on those tours.
This is an example of one of our classrooms. Although the space itself seems adequate, you'll notice the ceilings, there's many leaks. There used to be skylights in the building, and they were covered at some point, and we frequently have ceiling tiles that randomly fall while kids are here, safety issue, and almost all of those previous skylights at some point have had leaks. This is our nurse's office. You'll notice the nurse's office does not have a bathroom, which again is pretty obvious what challenges that brings. This bench area here actually has a heater underneath it, and sometimes it's so hot, it's hot to the touch, so the kids can't safely sit on it. This was originally part of the library. It's now the occupational therapist space, the English language teacher space for kids that English is their second language. The physical therapist also works out of here, and sometimes the preschool speech pathologist. This is the boiler room. We currently have 2 boilers. One's working, the other is not. We just this week had to do some repairs to try to keep things going, but it is a huge concern how long the boilers will continue to work. To see it, to know how many staff members there are and how limited spaces there are, and to know the possibility of what we could be doing with kids if we had the space to do it is the discouraging part as an educator. We have great ideas, programming that we'd like to do, but without the appropriate spaces, it makes it very difficult. The rise in the needs of kids social emotionally is so important to have the appropriate spaces, and we don't have them. We don't have safe spaces for kids.
Our classrooms don't have walls in between classrooms. Probably one of the biggest things we deal with is noise, and having students walk through multiple classrooms to either use the bathroom or to get to the cafeteria or the gymnasium or the library. You may notice as we walk through these classrooms is a lack of storage. We're lucky enough that the walls that we do kind of have are storage units or cabinets, and over the years certain principals or teachers have built into those. It's not always in the safest way. Our playground has a driveway runs through the middle of it, so it's not the safest for kids. There's deliveries and things. Sometimes trucks show up to deliver in the middle of the day, and we have to tell them, you can't deliver milk right now, we've got kids running around out here. This room, which we use as a conference room, it's also used as an office for our special education coordinator, our school adjustment counselor, our school psychologist. Our preschool uses this room with students at times, so you can see a lot of goings on in this space. And it is a room that we don't have great ventilation in. We have a heating system, base heating on the floor, and then the 2 windows. But when the door is closed, carbon dioxide can build up in this space. It makes people concerned when they hear that air quality is not great.
This wing of the building is what's used as our gym. As you can see right now, unfortunately, we don't have a gym at the moment as the book fair is here. So when we're doing things like a book fair or another event, we lose our gym space entirely, which, provided the weather is good, it forces Mr. White, our gym teacher, outside. If that's not a possibility, we have to be creative and then use other spaces in the building, cafeteria, hallways, or do PE in the classrooms. We're cramming lots of stuff into minimal spaces. We have little room for storage and supplies. So here behind us, we have one closet here and another small one here to store all of our supplies for the building. So our bathroom facilities do sometimes prove difficult for students who are smaller and younger in age. They're not able to reach the urinals or the toilets without having stools, which again proves a safety hazard. This is our cafetorium, which again serves as both cafeteria, auditorium, sometimes a gym, sometimes a space for assemblies. So it's very multi-purpose, which again causes huge issues when it comes to scheduling. Another big problem again with space is that we don't have any breakout spaces for small groups of students to work outside of their general education classrooms. So the back of our library is the only space we have for students to work in small groups. Again, it abuts our library, so noise is often a factor, and it also is a limited amount of space, so we can't get all of the necessary groups that we need to be able to work effective and efficiently throughout the day.
Okay, despite the fact that I cut myself off, I feel a lot better now that the video worked. So, to continue, we're hoping this evening we can show you that building a new PK-2 school through the MSBA will cost less and achieve more than repairing the existing outdated buildings. Hopefully we can answer those questions for you. This is how we started working with the MSBA. Since 2011, we've been submitting what are called statements of interest, or SOIs, to the MSBA for all 3 elementary schools, which we felt were in equal need of repair, update, or new buildings. It took 6 years for them to take a look at Center School. Now, again, MSBA is very structured, very scripted. Before they considered us eligible, we had to submit several reports, we had to answer many questions, we met with them, and then they came and did site visits. While they were meeting with us, we were explaining that we had submitted SOIs for all 3 schools. And as they were asking us questions, and some of the answers were the same for all 3, they asked us if they could take a look at the other 2 schools while they were there. Of course we took them, and when we did, they told us that we had an opportunity that we felt was unique, that we had not considered before. They said that we could either build a center school just for the children in center school, or we could propose a project that would educate all students in all 3 schools in Easton. I have to tell you, as an educator, I had an immediate gut reaction that was negative. I was very, very worried about a monstrous school for our smallest learners. These children will be literally 3 to 8 years old. I can tell you I am 100% confident now that this space will be more than appropriate for their needs and better than what we have in our 3 schools today. And that took a long process to get to. As you can see, we've been working on it since 2011. I hope we can explain that as well. The next point was they invited us into feasibility. Feasibility is what you generously allocated $1 million to from the Avalon payments, where engineers, designers, testing is done. There was a 10-week traffic study done. There were ground tests done. All of this was brought back to the school planning committee. The school planning committee is, again, particular based on MSB requirements, but also the charter of Easton. And that committee looked over all of these documents, and after a while, it became clear that some things were falling off as options, and they weren't even choices. But before we even got there were 2 major factors that the MSBA required us to consider, and I was very happy to do that. One was the enrollment. We worked with them for a number of weeks on this. You have to remember that the MSBA is responsible for billions of dollars, and there's too much need for them to be able to fulfill with the state funds available. And so they are extremely economical in the decisions they make. They don't want to build a school that is going to be outdated because of enrollment immediately after it's built, but they also don't want to build a school that's too big, because that is money that is not going to other districts in the Commonwealth that need it as much as we do. And so they had a lot of matrices they used in this process, from birth rate, death rate, transients, what happens when you build a new school. Our town planner was kind enough to come to Boston with us and explain potential projects coming to Easton. All of that together came up with the enrollment that MSBA had to approve. And then the educational program. The assistant superintendent, Chrissy Pruitt, the administrators in the district, teachers, staff, everyone worked together to create a plan that we envisioned for the 21st century. That is difficult to do. The classrooms we have now have 1 to 2 outlets in it. Clearly, nobody was expecting to use computers in 2019. We don't know what will be ahead of us 50 to 60 to 70 years from now. So our goal was to make it as flexible and adaptable as possible, and I believe we were able to do that. Those two things together equals the space requirement. That is prescribed, and you cannot go over it and receive any reimbursement from MSBA on it. And so that determined the actual square footage of the building. The enrollment for this building is designed for 875 students, which is 88 more than we currently have. And that's with our goal of 20 students per classroom. So there is room to grow if we had to. Finally, putting these three schools together actually reduced the ultimate footprint by 23%. You don't have 3 independent elementary schools with 3 cafeterias, 3 kitchens, 3 boiler rooms. And so there's an economy of scale there that we were able to take advantage of. The MSBA then approved the design for 2 site options. We only had the Parkview site and the Center School site available to us for consideration, and then the 2 enrollment options of just Center School or all 3 together. We had to look at what it would cost to build a new school, what it would cost to add, to renovate, and we had to do base repair costs as well. That looked something like this. I know you can't read this, it's on the project website if you want to take a look at it, but this is just to give you an idea of the many configurations that were seriously considered. But as I said, things started falling off. When we realized that, for example, on the Parkview site, we could tie in successfully to the existing wastewater treatment plant, it became abundantly clear that the minimum of 2 septic systems that were required at Center School was going to be cost prohibitive. That's one of the things that is not reimbursable by MSBA. They want to be fair to everyone, and everyone doesn't need certain things like septic systems. And so they are only reimbursed on items that would be universal to all districts. Other considerations like the traffic. And then you can see, I don't know if you can see, but there are a lot of items in red. Those were things that either didn't meet our educational plan or were completely unsuitable for us to have for the students of Easton. Finally, we ended up at the configuration we're considering this evening, which is a new school for all 3 current schools on the Parkview site. That then brought us to our schematic design, which has been happening from June to November. And that's the one you're seeing this evening on the posters, on the website, and everywhere else you've seen us presenting it. To give you a quick orientation, you can see at the very bottom of the screen is Lothrop Street. Right off of the bottom of the screen would be the police and fire department. Across the top is the current Spooner Street. Where you see the white space, that is the building. That's where the fields are right now. One of the other considerations that made this most advantageous is that where the school is now is on the fields you see here. Students can attend school successfully, without disruption, throughout the building of the new school. They can then move into the new school, and the original school can be demolished again without disruption while they're attending school in the new building. And then the fields can be reinstated. This was very rare in all of the considerations we looked at, which again drove up costs. They were add and reno projects that would cost more than this as a new building, because we had to incorporate what's called swing space, or places for the students to go so they could continue school while it was happening, like modular units, for example, which are extremely expensive. This offers us some benefits that we don't have at our 3 schools right now. We have separate car and bus loops. It's far safer to separate the buses from the cars and the vans. We have set up the facade where intake happens to have clear sight lines for security. We don't have that now in most of the 3 of them. We can maintain the field space. We can maintain the field that you see all the way to the left that has number 4 on it, which our other schools use for phys ed classes right now. We were also able to provide the scale that I talked about. I'll talk about it a little bit more when we get to the floor plan, but Pre-K and K is located on the first floor as an early childhood center, and grades 1 and 2 are on the second floor. The last two things I'd ask you to notice here is up the left-hand side, you see a connecting road that runs from Lothrop to Columbus. That was important to us and part of that 10-week traffic study I talked about, because if any of you travel on the campus right now, you know that traffic is difficult today. We wanted a comprehensive program that would tell us not only how could we abate that for the Parkview site, but also for the rest of the campus. And we feel that with all of the points of entry and egress here, it is actually going to help at the middle school and at RO. Even people coming from the high school can find other points of egress other than Lothrop Street. And then on the right-hand side at the bottom, you see another point of entry, and that is specific to emergency services. The designers worked with every stakeholder in town that was willing to meet with them. And among them was our colleagues on police, fire, DPW, accessibility board, you name it, and they met with them. And that was a recommendation that we were very happy to be able to add to the project. In terms of the floor plan, this is the first floor. The bank of rooms to the left, the bottom left, is light purple and dark purple. That's pre-K. It is contained, and it's right near the entrance. And right off of it, which you can't see on this, is a specially designed pre-K playground. For those of you with young children or grandchildren, you know that a play structure for a 3-year-old is very different than one for a 7 or 8-year-old. And we want to make sure they have safe structures to play on. Again, none of our schools has that now. The dark purple you see interspersed everywhere are special education services. Per mandate of DESE, Department of Education, those must be dispersed throughout the building. They can't be segregated or put off to the side. And we want as much to happen in the classroom as possible so students don't have to leave the classroom. On the right-hand side, the two wings you see are for kindergarten. An important consideration for us was maximizing the amount of space that MSBA would allow us to use. Again, it was a very prescribed footprint based on the enrollment and the educational plan, and we couldn't go above it unless the taxpayers paid for it without reimbursement, and we were not willing to do that. The designers worked with us to create what we're calling the neighborhoods. This helped with not only the space requirements, but also the concern about scale that I and many of my colleagues and many parents had. You can see that you will not find more than 4 or 5 clusters of classrooms together. That was purposeful. The fact that they're angled is also purposeful. We wanted to make sure that small children's sightline was contained to a small area. These hallways are far less overwhelming than the ones that they're in now. We were able to design it with the littlest learners in mind. Everything's low enough for their sight lines, the windows are low enough for them to look out, and they have, you can see the roof line is straight and the roof line is not angled, but the walls beneath are. And again, that's because we have a certain amount of space we can use for corridors, a certain amount we can use for special education, a certain amount we can use for classroom space, and so forth. We told the designers we wanted to, first of all, educate as many of our children in or close to the classroom as possible. And so they made what we're calling the front porches. And those are the angled spaces in the corridors. Where you see them wider, those are actually learning spaces. We were able to include them because they counted as corridor per the MSBA. And you can see our corridors are short. And so it was the most efficient space, the most efficient use of space that met our educational objectives. And we were very happy to have that incorporated into the design. It also allows us outside of the school to have covered areas where the children can go outside. A big part of this project is outside spaces. We don't have computer labs, we don't have science labs in an elementary school. And so a lot of this learning is done outside, where they can see nature, they can do things that are messy, because our children are darlings, but they're very messy. They also created spaces for us to have mudrooms as the kids walk in, so we can keep the rest of the school in pristine condition. We asked the designers to cost out what it would mean for us to straighten everything there. And they did that for us. First of all, we would lose those learning spaces, which we desperately did not want to get rid of, for effective education of these small children. But it would also increase the square footage of the building, and then the taxpayer burden would have been higher. And so it would have been more expensive to pay what MSBA wouldn't reimburse than it would be to leave it as it is now. And so this is why we have chosen to present this to you this evening. Anything you see in pink is administration. On the left-hand side is the school administration and the nurse's office. At the far bottom, you can see it is purposefully put close to where emergency vehicles come into the campus. And then on the top right is central office. Connor will talk about this in more detail because this was purely a fiscal decision. We know that people were extremely concerned about the fact that central office pays rent in an office building, and so we did a study to determine what would be less expensive, to put it in this building or to keep paying rent over a period of time. And he'll share that information with you. Up the center in yellow are common spaces. Those are community spaces. And the way the building is designed, it can be blocked off from the rest of the school. So it can be used by the community in the evening, on weekends, and in the summer, during vacations. We don't have that to offer now with our pre-K to 2 schools. There's a gymnasium, and there are 2 cafeterias. We took the regular space of a cafeteria and we cut it into 2/3 space and a 1/3 space, again, because of scale. The roofs are all, the ceilings are all brought down as low as they can be. We don't have huge cavernous spaces everywhere in the building other than where it's prescribed, for example, the gymnasium, for clearly safety reasons. And the scale is perfect for these children. It is a rare opportunity indeed for an elementary school to literally be designed for pre-K to 2. Typically, any elementary school you see in the state, even if it's a pre-K to 2 school, originally started as a K to 8, or a K to 5, or it was a middle school, or it was a high school. And so I can tell you that every element of the design was based on these young learners and their needs. The 2 green rooms you see are music rooms right off of the stage area. The stage area is set up between the larger cafeteria and the stage, and it can open on either side. And so it's possible to have large presentations for the school. I also want to note that the traffic on the school incorporates all the traffic that's at all 3 schools right now. And it has at least that much on this in this project. The second floor is 1st and 2nd grade, and it's the same thing. We wanted to keep small learning environments. Again, we wanted to maximize the space. MSBA mandates that the classrooms for the smaller grades are 1,200 square feet, the upper grades 950 square feet. So being able to stack different sized rooms, add the restroom facilities, add the special education where it's appropriate, and have those learning spaces, those angles provided that opportunity for us, again, at a less cost. Upstairs, the 2 green rooms are the art rooms, and then the yellow community space is the media center for children. It can also be used for the community when the school's not in use. I mentioned many of these things, so I'm going to remind you of them. This plan meets our educational goals for our children. It provides equity. We're hoping for a January 2022 opening, which means in 2 to 2.5 years, every child in pre-K to 2 will have access to the same facility and the same education. It consolidates our resources so that when we share one psychologist or one adjustment counselor over 3 elementary schools, you know the crisis is always at the school where those 2 people aren't. They will always be on site for all of our kids. It's less disruptive to education because the buildings can be done while they're there, creates co-location for opportunities with our other students on campus. Unfortunately, Moreau and Center to date have not had some of the advantages that Parkview has had, where we have high school students come over and work with them, or they attend performances or shows or events at the other schools. Now we'll be able to do that. Same with the professionals. They'll be able to all work together. When you try to have first grade educators, for example, work together in their 3 different schools, it is extremely difficult. Now they'll be together. It ultimately costs less than all of the other options, and it meets the scaled learning that I was very concerned about as a mom and an educator. In terms of the site, we get to keep those play spaces and fields that would have gone away in many of the other configurations. Safety was paramount. We don't talk about all the elements of safety because we don't want that out in the public, but this will not be retrofitted like our schools are now. Every area of this building has had safety as a consideration. The central administration is there. That is more convenient for staff, students, and everyone who wants to visit both schools and its central administration. We can use the existing wastewater treatment plant, as I stated. Car and bus loops, mitigate traffic. Construction will be shorter, and there's room for growth. The interior of the building has that scale design I talked about. Wayfinding by themes. You see here, for example, we're very cognizant of preserving the historical background of Easton, and we want this to be the first place they understand and appreciate what Easton has to offer. The 4 icons you see here are representative of ones that we'll use for each grade. They'll be color-coded so children can find their way more easily. They'll see the symbol, Frothingham Farmers, for example, for pre-K, and then we'll work to K1 and 2. We have universal design. This building is not just built to be ADA compliant, it allows anyone to travel anywhere. If we have visitors that can't maneuver a building easily or safely, they can get anywhere in this building. Small children, we worry about them on stairs. We have a ramp for them to use. It's preferable to elevators. We want the children to stay together. We don't want the children that are in a wheelchair to have to leave their class to go to an elevator. This has every element of universal design that matches what we've been doing educationally with universal design of our units. We have the neighborhoods and porches I talked about. It optimizes the space. We embed the services near or in the classrooms, and we have safety and security lock-offs. The exterior was chosen to be durable, long-lasting, and maintainable facade. It isn't the most expensive, but we want it to last. We don't want to have to be doing maintenance that's going to go back to the taxpayers within 5 or 10 years. There's outdoor covers for children to use that I described, appropriate scale, and sustainability in outdoor learning. We will see operational savings here because we will be saving energy. This recaps the benefits that I discussed when we talk about our current and future enrollment needs, our space for our educational programming, building and accessibility codes, the annual rent for central office, efficiencies, the fact that there's a financing program available for which we are not eligible for all of the repairs that need to be done, and that it promotes equity for every child in Easton. The Easton Elementary School project far surpasses the benefits at a less expensive cost than repairing the current buildings we have. Connor Reed will now explain that in more detail, as the finances are clearly important to your decision, and then we'll answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Dr. Cabral, and thank you to all of you here tonight. It's an incredible turnout, and I know this is asking a lot of your time, so we appreciate it. I'm going to try and take you through the budget and the finances for this project. It's not necessarily as exciting as thinking about little kids finding their way around with wayfinding and things like that, so I'll be as brief as I can. We're going to look at this project a few different ways. One is looking at the project budget in a vacuum, just looking at the early elementary school. I want to talk about the kind of value proposition as far as what this project would cost compared to just fixing the 3 schools that we already have. We'll take a quick look at how that compares to how our neighbors are doing around the state, and then talk about what that looks like for all of you as taxpayers as far as any increase on your tax bill. So the early elementary school project budget is just shy of $95 million. The opportunity that all of you are considering tonight and again next Tuesday is a process that Dr. Cabral outlined that could see $36 million come to Easton from the MSBA to cut down what the local cost to all of you would be for this great school. So the actual reimbursement rate that you heard Select Board Chair Fulgenetti read off of 55.93%, there's a variety of things that are considered ineligible. Dr. Cabral touched on it, certain things like septic tanks, things that are categorically not basically a priority of the MSBA because not every single educational building will need them. So that's a standard part of this. You get your actual reimbursement rate, and then you end up at the end of the day with what really matters when looking at finance, which is an effective rate. And as you can see on the pie graph in front of you, the effective reimbursement rate that we're looking at here is 38%. And the part of that that actually matters for everyone is that that takes a $95 million proposition for everyone here down to closer to $59 million. So these are large numbers. I think it's useful to kind of translate that into some value decisions. And so this graph here, I think, kind of tells most of the story, which is that when you look at the three schools that we have right now that are antiquated, they're simply past their useful life, to do the work necessary to bring them all just up to code, not to expand their size, not to make them modern and equitable for little learners, just to do that would probably cost about $86 million. That's 45% more than what the $59 million local cost of the early elementary school project would be. So we touched on the overall project budget, what it would look like to instead repair the three schools. I always think it's useful to check and see how we're doing. I think Dr. Cabral noted a few different times in a few different ways that although, of course, the paramount and guiding principle for the school planning committee was designing a great school for the kids, the thousands of children who will go to it, we also wanted to make a good business proposition to all of you and do a good job bringing an effective and efficient project to you. So what you see in that green box, this is data from the MSBA. This is not my information. This is from the state. They track the per square foot costs of these projects that they grant money to around the Commonwealth. And what you see right now is in the current window of time we're working in, fiscal 20 and 21, that the per square foot cost of projects like this ranges from $425 per square foot to over $650 per square foot. So the Easton Elementary School project is at $505. That's on the lower half of the range that we're seeing around the state right now. Something that came up in a few of our workshops we've had in the past 2 years was the conversation about central administration. As many of you know, the Easton Public Schools right now have to rent office space for central admin. And that's simply because they do not have the space in any of their existing buildings. And that is something that we did look at as part of this project. So we were really concerned with the prospect of putting administrative space in a building that's already going to be a relatively large project. And so we really dug into that and took a look at what's the kind of payback here. Right now it costs $90,000 plus a year for rent. And so we ultimately, the school planning committee, decided that it made good financial sense to include central admin space in the early elementary school project for a couple of reasons. One is that it provides a permanent home for permanent staff. Right now, the way that it works under state law is that if you need space, if I need space, if the superintendent needs space, we need to go out to bid and we can get 3-year contracts for space. The last time the schools went through that process was only a year or two ago. We had a single bidder. It was the existing landlord, and no one else bid. That landlord has no obligation to continue to offer that space to central admin. They have no requirement to do so. It is entirely possible that 3 years from now, that landlord could say, well, I can get a better deal from someone in the private sector. You're on your own. And then you have administrative staff and leadership that has nowhere to go. So that's a bit of a problem. So having central admin in this project solves that problem, and also it becomes more cost effective. That within about 15 years, looking at rent increases, we anticipate that it would be more expensive in each given year to rent than it would be to own our own space. So that seems like that's a long time away, but in the scheme of 50-year building projects, it's really not. That payback would happen 15 years into a 50-year building at least. So we felt that that was the most financially responsible way to go about doing this, and that is why it's in this project. So we've touched on the project budget, the value proposition of doing the early elementary school project through the MSBA process, taking a look at how that compares to folks around the state, which I think is quite favorably. So what does that actually mean for everyone here? We're going to be asking you tonight to vote to authorize borrowing for the treasurer through the select board to basically issue 30-year bonds issued in increments over a few years. And I don't want to put all of you to sleep, so I won't get into a tremendous amount of detail there. But the only reason I'm even mentioning that bonding strategy is because that plays into the way that this will impact the tax rate, which is that it will take between now and fiscal 25 for the full cost of those bonds to come onto your tax rate. So you'll see a very, very small amount of that starting next July, which is 7 cents, which will gradually work its way up to $1.07 on your tax rate in fiscal 25 for about 25 years. And then as the bonds come to be paid off in the 2050s, will fall off to nothing. That's one of the benefits of the debt exclusion model. That's a model that voters in this town have used repeatedly to support the schools in this town. And that's one of the things that's attractive about it, is that it is not forever. So that's the tax rate. What does that actually mean for folks? The median single-family home value in Easton right now, assessed value, is about $405,000. So we estimate that that $1.07 on the rate translates to roughly $433 a year for a majority of single-family homeowners in Easton. So a majority of single-family homeowners in Easton, we're looking at $430 or less a year. The median condo value is $215,000. So what we're looking at there is that a majority of condo owners would be looking at, in fiscal 25, this is not immediate, this is 5 years out, $230 a year or less. So I mentioned before that the debt exclusion model, this two-step process we're doing where you authorize borrowing and then you go to the polls and decide if you want to authorize the revenue necessary for it. That model is attractive because it's not a permanent commitment to a permanent tax increase. It is a commitment to a finite and a specific project that you know exactly what you're going to get, and it goes away. And so what this graph tries to show is that as recently as 5 years ago in fiscal 15, every single person in this room, every taxpayer, you had 89 cents, whatever your tax rate was in fiscal 15, whatever your tax bill was, 89 cents of that rate was paying the debt from the RO project that the community authorized and the OA project. RO is shown in blue, and as you see, that project was paid off in 2018, and now that is off your tax rate. You can see the orange graph is Oliver Ames High School. That is nearing maturity, and that will be paid off and come off of your tax rate in about 7 years. And so I thought this graph was important to talk about the fact that this is not permanent, to highlight the fact that this community has repeatedly made the decision to support the schools through this process, and to point out that 5 years ago you were paying 89 cents on your tax rate for multiple school building projects, for two, and in fiscal 27, 28, and through the rest, the majority of the century, it'll be $1.07 compared to 89 cents. That all having been said, I feel pretty good about the value proposition of this school. I believe in it, the board believes in it, but we understand that we're asking a lot of the community, and we understand that no matter how good the value proposition is, no matter how much more sense we think it makes to do this, that any tax increase has an impact on folks, and for some folks it's a significant burden. So we've made a point while talking about this to be sensitive to that fact and highlight that there are existing financial assistance programs in this community. There's a variety of abatements, exemptions, deferrals that are available through the assessor's office. The Department of Health and Community Services has a tremendous amount of resources, both municipal, but connecting folks with nonprofit, state, federal benefits, veterans benefits. we are here to help, so I would encourage folks to connect with those resources if need be. We also didn't feel that it was enough to come to you and say, you know, trust me, I think this makes sense, go for it. We have these existing programs over here, so that's why in November on your second town meeting this fall, there is an article that the Select Board put forward that would expand our financial assistance programs and would establish a tax relief fund that folks could voluntarily pay into that could be used to help defray costs of property taxes for seniors and those folks with disabilities. So that's what I have for now, just to talk about what the project costs, what those costs look like. We always kind of go back and forth internally about having slides like this and talking about other costs that we feel we have an obligation to be transparent about, to be clear about, and that includes the cost of inaction. So the choice that you're all considering tonight, that you're considering on Tuesday, is not spend $59 million for a wonderful school that will elevate the education of children for decades, or do nothing and have that exist. It's the $59 million project that will elevate the education of children for decades, or possibly spend significantly more than that just to bring antiquated buildings from the Cold War era up to code. Not moving forward at this point has costs, just as moving forward does. So there are opportunity costs. Dr. Cabral highlighted the lengthy process that led us here tonight. We have been seeking an invitation into this program by the state. It took 6 years, and then it took 2 years to get through the feasibility phase just to get here. And right now, we are estimating a move-in in 2022, 2023. From start to finish, that's 12 years. From asking to participate, being invited to participate, designing it, seeking approval, building it, and moving kids in. 12 years. If this does not move forward, the MSBA removes Easton from this process, and you start again. And you don't start again from feasibility, you start again from nothing. You start again from submitting applications. So if we started this over in 2020 next year, and we're assuming a 12-year window of time, you're talking about waiting until the 30s for these buildings. We would lose the $36 million that's on the table, that is funded by tax money that we all pay, that goes to the state. If it's not going to go to us, it will go to someone else. There is more need than there is money. And so if this does not proceed now, we lose that opportunity. We lose the $1 million that the voters of Easton were generous enough to already allocate to spend on feasibility. You lose the 8 years of time and money invested. You cannot reuse any of it. You cannot skip the line and go right back to a vote next year. You start over. Those are real, meaningful opportunity costs. There are capital costs. Dr. Cabral mentioned that there are significant issues with these buildings that are simply a result of being so old. There are thresholds that we are obligated to oblige by, that if we spend 30% of the value of these buildings doing repairs, we then have to bring them up to code. That puts us in an incredibly difficult situation where if a whole system goes and you replace that, you would then be forced into a reactive project. None of this 2 years of planning and input. You are forced into reacting and building a building that will be more costly on a square foot basis than what we're talking about tonight. You'd end up with 3 buildings that if you did that would cost almost 50% more. They would have no more space. They would have nothing that helps the educational needs of kids. So you would spend more money and have very nice antiques, but they wouldn't meet the needs of kids today. And then there are operating costs. We have finite resources. We have finite staff resources, and these current buildings are a major source, hundreds of work orders per year. And DPW does everything they can to stretch as much life out of them as they can. But we have a finite amount of folks, and if they're in these buildings patching boilers together and working on these every day of the year, that is time that they are not maintaining other buildings. I'm loath to end on a negative note, so I want to bring it back to how we started this after Dottie's motion, where you heard so many people, so many of your elected leaders, your appointed leaders, your neighbors, and your friends recommend this project to you. This has been looked at for years. It's been looked at very carefully. Parents have been involved. Administrators have been involved. I consider myself lucky to be both and to have been a part of it. And this is brought to you tonight with a strong recommendation from the Select Board, from the School Committee, the Finance Committee, the School Planning Committee, the Municipal Building Committee, the Budget Subcommittee, the Economic Development Council, and the Easton Educators Association. So as has been touched on repeatedly, and I apologize for that repetition, but tonight is one of two milestones for Easton to consider this project. In order for this project to proceed, you will need to decide if you would like to vote tonight to approve the borrowing necessary for the project, and you will need to vote again next Tuesday to authorize a debt exclusion override. In order for this project to move forward, both of these must be approved by voters. If they're not, this project will not move forward. If that does happen and the project is approved and you're generous enough to say yes to that, we'll spend about a year doing detailed design. We're looking at bidding for construction in December of 2020, executing a contract in February of 21, and substantially finishing that building in the fall of 2022. Something that's come up, and I'll note in passing, folks have had some good questions, which is what do you do with the existing buildings and land? Basically, this creates opportunity for the town and for all of you where we can consider reuse or sale of Moreau Hall and Center. And so that is a process that we've already started discussing publicly with a municipal building committee, and we'll continue to grow that conversation, assuming in the next 8 days these things move forward. It creates opportunities for reuse or for sale of those properties. And with that, I would like to end just saying thank you to everyone here. Thank you all so much for coming and for so many of you who participated in this project. Projects like this, like the Oliver Ames High School, like RO, are only possible thanks to and because of you and the community deciding to support them. So thank you for making the decision to invest in yourselves. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Cabral. Thank you, Connor Reed. So now is the time for any questions, comments, or concerns. If you do have any, just please remember the rules. There are 4 microphones. If anybody wants to stand up, gather your thoughts. You're only going to be able to speak one time. Any questions, comments, or concerns? And before you speak, you need to make sure you tell us your name and your address because you're being recorded.
Paul Protentis, 497 Depot Street, South Easton. I'm here with my wife, Barbara Duffy. Same address. We bought a house in Easton many years ago, primarily because of the education that we thought our kids would get here in the town of Easton. 4 of our kids went through the school system. They were accepted to a total of 32 different colleges. Don't ask me why they applied to 32 colleges with 4 kids. I think it has something to do with leaving us penniless. But they have all been successful, and part of that is we know that this school system is chronically underfunded, and they do an amazing job. But we are also appreciative of how beautiful the facilities have become over the years. Good schools bring in families. Good schools bring in young families. And those young families help support a very strong housing environment and prices and property values. And we certainly want to maintain that. Although my 4 kids have all moved on, I think we owe it to the next generation of children and families to provide them with a first-class competitive education. So I just want to make sure that I understand, and I think we all understand the numbers. If we undertake the update of these 3 schools, it will cost the town approximately $86 million and receive no state funding. But if we accept the proposed new pre-K to 2, then we will have a centralized school that would only cost $59 million to the town, because the state is picking up $36 million of MSBA funding. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Great. I say we just vote for it. Thank you.
I see somebody else standing at the middle microphone here, the second microphone.
Sure. Good evening. My name's Carol Lundeen. I live at 34 Western Ave. Dr. Cabral, earlier you were talking about what drives design. You mentioned enrollments and educational programs and space requirements. From my point of view as a citizen, the educational aspects are one perspective. I'm curious about the environmental impacts, what energy systems would the new school be using, and how is the design addressing the risks and challenges we face in our changing climate?
Thank you for that question. As part of this process, as I said, the MSBA looks at everything. And one of the areas, we started with a 52% reimbursement rate. We were actually able to accumulate extra points for two things. One was our sustainability and our environmental considerations in the building, and the second was the maintenance. They looked at longitudinally the maintenance that has been done by our amazing DPW and our fantastic custodial staff, and our plan for going forward with maintenance. Again, they want to invest in projects that they feel confident are focusing on sustainability, the environment, and being able to take care of the buildings. So we actually increased to 55.9% because of that. In terms of, you want to know about specific systems? Because we have the designers here and they can answer that for you.
Sure. Yep. Thank you.
Bob Bell is an architect with Perkins Eastman, and Don Guardiello also.
Great. So any project with the MSBA must be a sustainable school. So this school will be LEED Silver certified at a minimum. But we don't stop there. We certainly know that particularly for this age group we're designing for, material health is critically important. We also know that there's so many things that are special about Easton, such as the natural environment and the resources. And so the school has been designed thoughtfully, and we are in the process of making sure that it connects the students to not only the surrounding environment and to nature in a lot of meaningful ways, but that the school itself is also seen as a teaching tool. So there are many attributes, both indoor and outdoor, that we've been working on in the design to be exactly that. So it's not just a sustainable school, it's intended to help educate sustainably forward as well.
It's also worth noting that all of the new classrooms will have north-south facing classrooms. That's useful in a way that the north light is controlled and the south light is controllable via shading devices. And what's good about that is that is proven through studies that natural daylight in connection to outdoors actually increases grades, and also students want to come to school and learn in these spaces. It's worth noting that the envelope will be very energy efficient, and the system that we're using is a distributed air at a low volume. Low, again, for the youngest students, it distributes low volume air and then rises up, and it's very energy efficient from a system standpoint.
The mechanical system is called displacement ventilation. So especially for young learners, it puts the fresh air exactly where they are and uses natural convection to rise. It's at a very low velocity, as Dawn had suggested, because it's good educationally. So we don't want acoustic sound and other disturbances. We want fresh air, good light, good air quality.
Thank you. I have a question. my understanding about the geology of town is that more or less Lincoln Street and Main Street, it's very ledgy at the surface, and as the geology continues to the south, the ledge dives down and there's more soil on top of the ledge. Living on Western Ave, I have a neighbor who's a professor at Stonehill in the Environmental Studies Department. When she purchased her home a couple blocks from me, she had a geothermal heating and cooling system installed, which, if I understand correctly, keeps the air temperature at approximately 50 degrees, so that during the winter, the building could be heated up from 50, and during the summer, 50-degree air, more or less, would be piped into her home. So I'm wondering if the ledge at the Parkview School site allows something like geothermal, and have you considered that?
Yes, actually, in a similar project that had ledge, we learned, maybe it was the particulars of that soil condition in the ledge itself, that it was still very conductive, so still a possibility. And I know that we're also looking at certainly photovoltaics. The school will be designed PV ready, so we're looking at other ways to not only lower the energy use, but the kind of clean energy prospects for the school.
So you are considering it?
Yes.
Terrific. Another question on the... That's not true. It was one visit to the mic, if I understand correctly. So on the overview of the traffic flow around the campus, I understand you have a route for buses and a route for cars. What I didn't see is any information for traffic that would lead to where my home is, my neighbors on Western Ave. I'd like to know about that, please.
Okay, if you could please orient me where Western Ave is from this diagram.
I believe it's towards the upper left.
Okay. So I believe this will answer your question, but Spooner Street is still a main access point into this site and continues through in a slightly different shape, kind of at somewhat the top of the screen there, or the top of the site plan. And then we have a roadway connecting from Columbus all the way down to Lothrop through the site. That's intended to become an entry point as well as an exit. And the connection down on Lothrop is intended not to be an entrance but an exit. So the idea is to provide improvements for access into the site by providing the road through and providing more ways to exit the site. That road connecting Columbus and Lothrop is intended to also provide opportunities or relief to some of the other schools as they're staggered in their start and pickup times. I'm not sure if that answers your question.
It doesn't quite. On Western Ave, while one end is a dead end, the other end of the street leads to the school complex. We have quite a few drivers in the morning who come down Western Ave. I don't know if they're obeying a speed limit or not, but for kids that are waiting for buses and people walking their dogs, going for a walk, there's a bit of fast traffic on that street.
I think it's worth noting that they should obey the speed limit. But unrelated to that, as far as bringing traffic off of the neighboring streets and onto the campus was a priority. And if you can follow the little inlet, the horseshoe, if you will, is the car drop. Thank you. Here, we have enough area along this entire roadway to queue more than 75 cars. So all of the traffic that currently exists that with drop-off and cars idling and either waiting to pick students up or drop them off in the morning will now be on campus. So there is enough physical roadway to accommodate all of the cars in a building.
Thank you. One more question. Oh. So we're taking down some trees and we're we're disturbing some habitat for this project. I'm wondering if there are any thoughts about planting more trees that are shown on the plan.
Absolutely. On a lot of our projects, we track the caliper inches and make sure that we're replacing that or surplus. I think we're in the stages right now where this is a schematic design, and we'd be happy, you know, what we would be doing is working continuously with the community on, and with the neighbors and the abutters on what else we can do, maybe around the perimeter, but also to create what we're looking for too is a school that's set within a park-like setting. So.
Very good. Thank you. Appreciate it.
So I think that you were up next.
I think I was up next.
Yes, good evening. My name is Charles Melo, 2 Scotch Dam Road. And I'd like to begin by saying that we're very fortunate, we're blessed to have a town administrator as intelligent and astute as Connor Reed, and equally as fortunate to have a superintendent with the knowledge and insight and foresight as Dr. Cabral. Now, when I grew up, unfortunately, I was in classrooms of 35 plus children sometimes. Teachers do their best, but unfortunately, sometimes as a child, it may fall back a little bit, not enough so it's like going to stick it in the face, but nevertheless, the teacher can't pick up on everything and see one student is falling back a little bit. Now, I'm in the construction business, and if this doesn't go through, the condition these buildings are described in, the disrepair and the problems that they're having, what's going to happen if this doesn't go through, it's going to be years before it's addressed again, and these buildings are going to fall into further and further disrepair. So the figure we're hearing about bringing them up to snuff today isn't going to work down the road. And ultimately, it's going to cost us down a whole lot of money, and I say let's go for it.
Thank you. Okay, over here to my far right.
A lot of my, Karen Tucker, 226 Turnpike Street. A lot of my questions have been answered through the night, but my biggest concern is sticking all the schools in one spot with all the nutcases that are out there nowadays. Something happens and our whole generation is gone. And I'm not the only one that feels this way. I've talked to quite a few people and a lot of people that are former teachers. And don't put all your eggs in one basket. If we could take this school and put it on another chunk of land that this town has acquired, thousands of acres of land in this town, separate it, you know, don't put all your schools in one place. You've got the fire department, police department, and all your schools in one chunk. Not smart.
You want to address that?
Thank you, ma'am. As someone who is in the buildings, I can assure you that everyone in those buildings is thinking about every single child first. The staff, the administrators, and frankly ourselves. This building is being built with the most current safety considerations that are available to us that none of our 3 elementary schools has right now. Those 3 schools are in far more vulnerable positions than this one will be for many decades to come. I appreciate the concern, but I assure you this was also done with our wonderful police department, fire department. We have a security consultant that's been working with us. We have a very good plan in place for the security of our children. I understand we don't share that readily, which may give the idea it doesn't exist, but that is purposeful. And while we cannot prevent everything, I can tell you that a lot of talented people have worked on this, and they have given the input that makes this building the safest it can possibly be.
Okay, right here in the middle.
Thank you. Thank you. My name is Bill Hadge. I live at 1 Carriage House Lane. I've been in Easton since 1981. My wife Susan has been a teacher in the school system, both at the junior high school and the high school, and we've had 3 kids, all of whom went through the Easton school system. So education was very important to us. It was very important to us when we chose Easton. I really just want to say that it is so humbling in a way to listen to Leisha and Connor, and for everybody that's had anything to do with tonight's presentation and all the work that's led up to tonight's presentation. I just want to thank you, because it's with such, I guess, honesty and transparency and intelligence that you address this group with such extensive sort of detail and coverage of all the topics. I think there's nothing more important in a community and really in society than education. And as a few people have already spoken, I think it would be a huge mistake to miss this opportunity. I think there's nothing to be gained by not following through on this. So I wish you luck. I intend to vote for it, and I thank all the people that are here tonight.
Thank you. Okay, over here to my right.
Hi, Kellen Reed, 1 Scotchdam Road. Ms. Moderator, I call the question.
I need a second. Okay, we need a majority for that vote, so all in favor? Okay, so now I'm going to turn it over to Danielle Sicard, our esteemed town clerk, and she is going to tell you how to vote.
So are we all set with that? Okay. Good evening. Now that we're moving to the vote, I just wanted to review a few instructions so that we can perform this vote in an orderly and most efficient manner. There are 6 ballot boxes in the front of the room and 2 in the back of the room. We will ask that you wait until somebody goes to your row and escorts you and tells you it's your turn to approach the ballot box. They will be providing marking pens at the end of each row that I ask, if you need one, to pass down to the other end so that everybody has a chance. If you do have a black pen with you, feel free to utilize the black pen. You do not need to use the felt ones that will pass down the row. However, a blue or a red will not be read correctly by the machines, so please utilize black pens only. What will happen is you all have received a stamp. If you're a registered voter, you would have received a stamp on your left hand and a ballot. If you neglected to check in, please go into the lobby and check in now to get your stamp and also to get your ballot. As you approach the ballot box, there will be an election worker in front of the ballot box. Please show them your left hand so they may see the registered voter stamp. That is to make sure that you're not casting a ballot for somebody who wasn't registered. At that time, you may approach the ballot box. A ballot can be inputted into the tabulating machines. These are the same tabulating machines that we use at elections, and they can go upside down, right side up, backwards, or frontwards. Either way is fine. As you finish and the machine has taken your ballot, it will say that the system is ready for the next ballot to be put through the tabulator. We'll ask that you step aside, go to another election worker, who will then stamp your hand with a check mark. That check mark means that you have now cast a ballot. So if you approach the ballot box and you already have a check mark, you will not be permitted to do another ballot. That's the system that we're utilizing. Do not go back the same way that you hit the ballot box. We're going to come down the aisles, go either to the right or the left. The person at the ballot box will tell you, and we'll proceed back to our seats the opposite direction. And so at this time, we'll have our election workers come to the ballot boxes, prepare to do their own casting of ballots, and then they will start orderly, row by row, to do the ballots. One final note I will make is after you've cast your ballot, please do not be roaming around the room. That makes it a lot more difficult to do this in an orderly process. If you need to use the restrooms, continue out and stay in that area. But the more movement that we have, the longer it'll take to actually cast the ballots. Thank you.
And please don't leave until we count all the votes. Thank you. We'll make it quick. So just to clarify, a yes vote votes yes for the motion that was presented by Select Board Member Fulgenetti and passes this part, or goes from this part to the next, to the November 5th election. Okay, so a yes vote is for what everybody's been speaking about up here. Okay?
Hello, everyone. Sorry. Again, we encourage everyone to stay until the outcome of a vote is announced. However, we do see that some folks are leaving. Just a reminder, if you took a yellow bus from the industrial park, you'll take one back. They're out front. If you need a ride, if you're in a remote lot, there are white Council on Aging vans also out in the front to help you out. Again, we recommend folks stick around till the vote is announced and the meeting is adjourned. But if you are going to leave, buses and shuttles are out that way. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, last call. If you haven't placed your vote into one of the ballot boxes, please do so.
Okay, can I have everyone's attention? If everyone can just grab a seat if you'd like to. Of course, we have beeping in the background. Before I read the vote, I just want to say that when the question was called earlier, there was a vote that we took, and I declared that it was a majority vote, but I want to tell everybody that it was a clear 2/3 majority vote, and I just want to say that for the record, okay? Also, I want to remind everybody that we have a vote, a town vote, which has been said again and again and again, but I'm going to say it one more time. Next Tuesday, November the 5th, the polls will be open from 7 in the morning till 8 at night. And if you need an absentee ballot, the absentee ballots will be available up until noon the day before, correct, Danielle? Noon the day before, okay? All right. So, with that being said, I'm going to tell everybody what the number of the votes are. And we have 1,029 yeses, 48 noes. So that's a clear 2/3 majority, and Article 1 passes. Okay, I had a motion to adjourn in a second. Everybody who was in favor of the motion to adjourn, a clear 2/3 majority. Thank you, everybody.